All right, great. Again, this is Ken Brown. I'm with Transportation Energy Partners. I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. We appreciate your participation. Again, as I think everybody knows, we had a historic election about a month ago, and we will have a new president, new administration, and some new leadership in the Congress in January, and we wanted to talk about what that means for the world of alternative fuels and vehicles. First, I want to thank all of our many sponsors who have sponsored Transportation Energy Partners and our Energy Independence Summits over the years. We could not do this without your support, so we really appreciate it very much. We have a star-studded group of panelists for you today who have collectively dozens of years of experience here in Washington working on federal policies related to alternative fuels and vehicles. We'll be hearing from Paul Kerkhoven from NGV America, who many of you know, Genevieve Cullen from the Electric Drive Transportation Association, Kaleb Little from National Biodiesel Board, Phil Squair, who's with the National Propane Gas Association, and Phillip Wiedmeyer, who's with the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition, and he's also the Vice President of Transportation Energy Partners. Just a quick review. Most of you know us, but for those of you who don't, Transportation Energy Partners is a national nonprofit organization. We provide policy support to the nation's nearly 100 Clean Cities coalitions and their tens of thousands of stakeholders across the country. We work to keep coalitions and their stakeholders informed of key policies and funding opportunities, and we focus on educating decision makers about the importance of advancing markets for cleaner vehicles and fuels. I think, as most of you know, we have an annual Energy Independence Summit. The next summit is coming up February 12th through the 15th in Washington, D.C. I believe this will be the 11th or 12th annual summit. It's turned out to be it's a can't miss event, so for those of you who haven't registered, I encourage you to register and be there. We'll be meeting with leaders of the new administration. We'll have presentations on the Volkswagen settlement. There will be representatives of most of the Clean Cities coalitions across the country. Top industry leaders will be there. We'll have roundtable sessions with the key federal agencies, EPA, DOE, Department of Defense, Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture. We'll have a day of meetings on Capitol Hill with congressional offices, followed by a reception at the UPS Capitol Hill Townhouse. For those of you who've been before, you know what a great event it is. And for those of you who haven't, you should come and join us. And this year it's going to be particularly important as we seek to educate leaders of the new administration as well as some of the new folks in Congress, as well as to continue to strengthen our relationships with our allies and supporters in the Congress. Just so you know, for Transportation Energy Partners, our top agenda items for the past several years have been to extend and maintain the tax incentives for alternative fuels, vehicles, and infrastructure, to increase federal funding for the various federal alternative fuels programs, to support and work with our allies to preserve the Renewable Fuels Standard, and we are now working to authorize the Clean Cities program under law. I thought I'd give you a few highlights. We've been quite successful thanks to all of your help, the help of our many industry partners, and the effectiveness of the Energy Independence Summit. Following the leadership of our industry allies, we've been successful in extending the tax incentives and maintaining them. We've seen an increase in funding for both the Clean Cities program and the EPA Clean Diesel grants. Thanks to the leadership of the National Biodiesel Board and others, we've seen the Renewable Fuels Standard now finalized for 2017 and actually for 2018 for biomass-based biodiesel. So I think these victories show the strength of the grassroots efforts across the country. I think they also show the strength when all of the various alternative fuels, whether it's biofuels, electric, propane, natural gas, hydrogen, when we join together, we become that much more powerful. And it also shows the impact that Clean Cities coalitions have in their communities around the country. So congratulations, thanks, but we got a lot of work to defend our victories. So with that, we're going to open up a discussion and take advantage of the expertise of our panelists. So the first thing we're going to talk about is just generally what folks think the world is going to look like under a Donald Trump administration. I think we'll begin there. How about Genevieve Cullen with the Electric Drive Transportation Association? We'll let you go first. Let's see. You might be on mute, Genevieve. I'm going to unmute you. Why can't I? Sorry for the technical Paul, you look unmuted. So, Paul, why don't you take a crack at the first question while I try and unmute the others. Paul, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm muted also on my own.
I can hear you. You're good.
Okay, good. Yes, I think this is a very comprehensive list of people that are all looking at potential jobs within the Trump administration and in assistance of where the new administration is headed. The one person on the list here that is very instrumental is the third one down, is Congressman Kramer from North Dakota. Similarly, the Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt would be a very good program manager within the program for Clean Cities, natural gas activities, and from our perspective. Similar, I guess, Governor Phelan from Oklahoma is out there. The person that has been looked at as a potential secretary for the Department of Energy is the current senator from West Virginia, Senator Manchin. And that, of course, leads the major thinking on all of that is Trump administration looking back into coal, and coal becoming a big player in this country. I think that's sort of a little bit of a perspective from my side. I will defer to some of the others, that the other panelists as well. So again, I'll stop there.
Genevieve, I think you should be unmuted now, but in particular, I mean, we've heard a lot about, just in reading and during the campaign, about the support of the Trump folks for oil and gas. What's your sense of where electric's going to fit into this, and what do you see as the outlook?
Well, thanks, Ken, and yes, so everyone can hear me now, I guess?
You're good.
Thank you. I'd say that first, I think we have to always begin these conversations for now with the most telling detail of the landscape where we are standing is the enormous amount of uncertainty that's out there. We have based on campaign rhetoric, based on sort of this list of the folks being considered for cabinet positions, and in general they look to embrace smaller government and bigger fossil, but there's still a lot we need to learn about the Trump administration's priorities, about the folks who actually ultimately are picked to lead those agencies, and finally what the interest of the House and the Senate, while both being controlled by the majority party, what their own priorities are, and how much in lockstep with the administration they're going to be. So that's the basic ground we're standing on, and while the indicators of the folks under consideration and the talking points that have been floating around certainly indicate a more challenging environment for alternatives. I think that for electric drive and for the other folks on this call, I think we all know that with every new administration, you gotta make the case, for the national benefits of the policies that benefit these technologies in these industries, right? It's about energy security and global competitiveness as well as sustainability, and I think there's that all of those arguments have can gain traction in a Trump administration.
Great, thanks, Genevieve. Phil Squair, would you like to offer your views?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Ken. I think this is a great opportunity here. There is a lot of uncertainty, of course, but I think that there are a lot of things that aren't going to change quickly. I don't want to jump ahead in the presentation too much to get too specific on tax issues, but the 800-pound gorilla is tax reform, and what that means. I think it's pretty likely that existing incentives that have been in place through the end of this year are probably not going to get extended, at least right now. So we're going to have a new environment from that perspective, but there are a lot of things that aren't going to change. I think that the value of alternative fuels may need to be marketed differently. Instead of maybe leading with the cleanliness aspect or the emissions aspects, we're going to need to reorient our materials to look more at jobs, impacts, and value for the American economy. So I don't think that this is in any way a catastrophic thing for alternative fuels. And speaking on behalf of the propane industry, there are a lot of people in a lot of places around the country that I think have found a lot of value in alternative fuels, and I think we continue to make those presentations and argue in support of what we think is good for jobs in the economy. It may be as easy as that. It never probably isn't, but that's at least where we're going to be starting from. Great.
Kaleb, you want to, from the National Biodiesel Board, do you want to, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ken. First of all, thanks for having us on here and all that you guys do as an organization to help educate and strengthen our efforts that are in DC. So I would basically agree with what Genevieve and Phil said from a basic perspective. A lot of uncertainty, but for biodiesel and a lot of the other alternative fuels, they support good local jobs, U.S. energy independence, two things that remain very significant for both President-elect and many of the Americans who voted for him. For biodiesel specifically, he was very supportive, on the campaign trail and supportive of the Renewable Fuels Standard. Obviously, that's very important for the biodiesel industry. As far as Congress goes, many of our longstanding biodiesel champions were reelected to serve in their respective states and districts. So biodiesel's had a long bipartisan support, and we're relatively confident that even though there are some changes in Congress and leadership in different positions, that it's an industry that they'll continue to support for a number of reasons. So the biggest thing, and Phil mentioned it too, is we really expect to lean more heavily on maybe some different messaging for biodiesel and other alternative fuels. So things like creating jobs and economic growth, domestic energy production, clean air. Those are really things I think that we anticipate will resonate well with the incoming administration and Congress. So, maybe where in previous administration, reducing carbon emissions and sustainability and some of those things were, focused on more heavily. I think that job creation, economic growth, and that messaging will be extremely important as we move forward.
Great. And Phillip Wiedmeyer from Alabama Clean Fuels. Hello, Phillip. We lost you on your phone, Phillip. I'm showing you as hooked in by computer again, not by phone. So we're going to move on while Phillip works to get reconnected. So we touched a little bit on the tax incentives. I think, as many people know, the group of folks on the phone here and people around the country have been fighting on a basically year-by-year basis to keep extending the federal tax incentives, usually 1 year at a time. Occasionally we're fortunate enough to get 2 years at a time, which we got for 2015 and 2016. But the current incentives expire at the end of 2016, and it doesn't look right like they're going to get extended, at least certainly not before the end of this year, and who knows when. So I'd like to, I guess we'll start with Phil Squair to give us your take on what you're hearing, what you're seeing in terms of extenders, comprehensive tax reform, what this is going to look like, and how you see it all fitting together.
All right, thanks again. It's just because they expire doesn't mean they're completely expired. If there's anything we've learned over the last 10 years or so, it's that Congress can do these things retroactively if they choose. And so, our advocacy is going to continue, even if we have what I think is going to be a different beast. We're not looking at an extenders bill. I do think that there's a much higher likelihood that tax reform will move this year. With the Trump administration's emphasis on economic development and infrastructure development, I think that the tax reform movement will take on a lot of those themes. And so I think that there's going to be plenty of opportunities for the alternative fuels community to advocate for tax policies that benefit our segments. And so I don't think that extenders or tax provisions related to alternative fuels and tax reform are mutually exclusive. And so we're going to continue to analyze our materials and make contacts in Ways and Means and Finance operations on behalf of our particular preferred solutions. And I think we can make that case in a variety of different ways, and we've succeeded for 10 years in doing so, and I don't see why we can't keep doing it.
Great, thanks, Phil. And Paul Kerkhoven, on tax incentives, do you think it opens up an opportunity to get a longer, rather than a year-by-year extension, a longer extension of some of the incentives? You know, potentially 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, thanks, Ken, and thanks again. Hello to everybody again. From our perspective, from NGV America's perspective, we've always been looked for some stability in these tax credits, and we would look for a longer-term period. We've been advocating for a 5-year period of our incentives. But the uncertainty of the issue and where they're going to go, how they're going to go forward with these tax credits, just as Phil was describing, brings some uncertainty, and where it goes, I think we're looking at the concepts of potentially not having any of these tax credits, and we should probably be aware of that. But of course, we're going to be advocating for them and looking for them. Ken, to me, it's the uncertainty of it and where it's going, and how it's going to go, for how tax credit and tax reform is going to manipulate its way, work its way through this new Congress as well.
Genevieve, can you say a little bit about, so basically there are more than one tax incentive for the electric vehicle industry. Obviously, you have the infrastructure tax credit, which has been done on a year-by-year basis, but you also have the vehicle tax credit, which is done by volume. Are you concerned in the debate on tax reform that that's going to be vulnerable at all, and what kind of strategies are you all contemplating to make sure that the vehicle tax incentive is protected?
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, I think as to what Phil said before, that we are, I think on the tax incentives that will expire at the end of this year, we are obviously been working very hard on an extender, and that's for the alternative fuel infrastructure tax credit, and also for the fuel cell electric vehicle tax credit. So both of those will expire at the end of this year, and the outlook for them, it's tricky to see how Congress would be looking to do any sort of extenders next year if they were seriously talking about moving tax reform. They would seem that they would be unlikely to move extenders in advance of a real push to make progress on tax reform. And in the context of tax reform, the talking points have been, although everyone, you've seen the House blueprint. We've heard some, general noise from the incoming administration about the principles of tax reform, but the details are very much in doubt. What we do know is that people will be focusing on simplifying the tax code. They'll be looking at technology neutrality, and I think a lot of people are looking at trading a lower overall rate for and getting rid of individual credits and deductions. So I think that the atmosphere is more challenging for sector-specific or fuel-specific tax credits. It's certainly not an impossible atmosphere. I think, as we've all said, there's arguments and meaningful arguments to be made about the sort of national security and economic benefits associated with investment in these alternative fuels. But I absolutely think that everyone is going to really have to work harder to make the case for their credits, and at the timing of when Congress might be willing to move extenders or able to move tax reform is unclear.
Thanks, Genevieve. This one's for Kaleb on this. which is, some are, some are saying, well, we should have, get rid of all incentives, all tax incentives, for alternatives and for oil and gas. And, do you think, how do you think that's likely to play? Do you think that's a potential outcome? Is that a potential argument that we can make, that oil and gas has certain long-term incentives and lots of advantages, and so that's one of the reasons it's important to maintain the incentives for alternative fuels? How do you see that coming down, Kaleb?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ken, and one we've seen and heard from some folks in our meetings as well. The idea probably sounds better on paper than it is to logistically do. Like you said, there's a lot written into the current tax code relating to oil and gas and current, current technologies that are out there. So from our perspective, we usually let folks know about those, and then that, for example, the biodiesel tax incentive and others for other alternative energies are there to try to level that playing field. Congress chose a long time ago to support the production of energy because it's very important to our country, to our economy, and just as important, we think, are similar support for those renewable sources of those energies. So really for us, we've taken the approach of showcasing the benefits of supporting a healthy and growing biodiesel industry along with those incumbent industries. So, as Phil and Genevieve mentioned, the vehicle for that in the past 5 or so years have been through extenders packages for the biodiesel tax incentive. We actually just had about 24 of our National Biodiesel Board members out in on the Hill last week and meeting with members of Congress and educating them on what those benefits are of a biodiesel tax incentive, and encouraging them to continue that and not let it lapse again here at the end of the year. A lot of the feedback they got was, Congress did not intend to move a tax extenders package before they leave town at the end of the week, but that the new administration and new Congress are intending to move pretty aggressively early next year on their major agenda items, including that idea of comprehensive tax reform.
Great, thanks. And Phillip Wiedmeyer from Alabama Clean Fuels, obviously tax reform is a major priority for the new administration and for the Congress. But if history is any kind of an indicator, getting a comprehensive tax reform bill, getting agreement, getting it through is usually quite a slog and usually a multi-year effort. From your experience, what's your sense of that? And if it does seem to drag out, does that create an opportunity to push for the extension of the current incentives, at least in the short term?
Well, absolutely. We haven't seen that kind of effort in 20 years, since the 1986 tax reform was the last time there's been any major comprehensive tax reform legislation. There's always a tax bill, and we may wind up with that. And Congress has been working towards that in the last several years, but they've not been able to get agreement on it, and that will continue to be a challenge, will always be a challenge. So in that kind of environment, what's important is to make sure that the clean transportation industry is getting up on the Hill and educating and explaining its role in the economy and how we contribute to jobs and energy security and GDP. That those will all be important factors that will be taken under consideration during the debate on tax reform. And it may ultimately wind out, I agree with, I believe Genevieve had said that she did not expect an extenders bill to move prior to a comprehensive tax reform effort. And that was one of the major hallmarks of Speaker Ryan when he was chairman of Ways and Means Committee. So there is some groundwork there, and I suspect he will like to see that effort go forward before we start dealing with tax extenders or any other tax measures on a piecemeal basis. They will want to most likely give every opportunity and every effort for a comprehensive reform to pass, and short of that, then they'll start focusing on piecemeal type tax measures, I believe.
Great. Thanks, Phillip. So we're going to move on from tax reform on to federal funding for alternative fuels programs. Transportation Energy Partners and our allies have focused primarily on two major funding programs, the Clean Cities program and the EPA diesel emission reduction grants. And there are two things, hang on one second. Oops. Two things to think about here. First is the fiscal year 2017 appropriations, which have not been completed. Oops. Having trouble with the slides here. There we go. Fiscal year 2017. We're in fiscal year 2017 right now. Both the House and Senate Appropriations Committees have passed all of the appropriations bills for the current fiscal year. Since October 1st, we've been operating under what's called a continuing resolution, which is basically a short-term provision that funds the government at the prior year's level until they're able to reach agreement on the next year. Had the presidential election ended up with a different result, there would have been an agreement by the House and the Senate and the administration to finalize the fiscal year 2017 appropriations right now in December, because there was basic agreement and they had worked out most of the details. As I mentioned previously, we've been very successful working with our allies. We had at least $34 million for the Clean Cities program in both the House and Senate bills, including some very good language about grants. And we also saw the House increase funding for the diesel emission reduction grants up to $100 million from $50 million last year. So we were on track to see a very good result for fiscal year 2017, and that's now up in the air a bit in terms of timing. They're now going to fund the government at last year's level through April of next year, and then they will work between now and April. The Congress will work, the House and the Senate, with the new administration to finalize the FY 2017 numbers. And then simultaneously, the work will begin on the following year's budget, since that needs to take place now, and that begins next October 1. And so to start that process, the new administration will propose their budget in March, typically. There will be consideration in the appropriations subcommittees and full committees likely in May, June, possibly into July. Then House and Senate floor action in the summer and early fall, and the final legislation at the earliest would be in September and could last into October, November, December. But that's the process we're looking at moving forward. I'm going to ask, start with Paul Kerkhoven, given your past experience and just watching when new administrations come in, what's your sense of what's going to happen with appropriations, and how do you see this moving forward in terms of funding for the Clean Cities program and the diesel emission grants and other federal funding programs?
Thanks, Ken. I think you laid it out quite well, the timing and the process of that. I think all of us have some individual items in the appropriation bills as well that we're following, and the uncertainty of what's going to happen in April with some of those funding levels. The only question I have is potentially the modifications, or when the new president will submit his budget, whether that will be in March or of some time frame, and what that will contain, where that will consist of. I think the whole, what we've seen over the past years is that, what we're going to do in April or May, we're going to do an omnibus bill at some point. That, by the way, may have also potential of including some of these tax extenders that we have talked about, if that's going to happen. Now, of course, we're talking April now, but are we going to do a CR? How they're going to reconcile the differences between the different funding levels? I think a lot of it's up in the air. The one thing I did want to add in there is that in your line for the diesel emission reduction programs, there's a little sideline going through here where there was a VW settlement issue that was brought that is bringing a lot of money into different states, and some of these states, some of that money can be used into the DEER program that some that states already have, and that so there's another additional opportunity for some funds that people will look for. But all in all, I think you laid it out very well. The uncertainty is the one issue that we're all concerned about, and we from NGV America continue to go through the different appropriators and appropriation committees to make sure that both the Clean City fundings are done right, as well as the issues that we have in those individual bills.
Great, thanks, Paul. Phil Squair, any thoughts on the appropriations process and how that's likely to move forward?
No, there's grand statements of how they're going to go through the regular order, but I'm not going to hold my breath for that. We have more Democrats in the House and more Democrats in the Senate this year than last year, and that may not matter that much in the House, but in the Senate that could matter. So you can't really tell, but if they want to pursue individual appropriations bills, well, that's going to soak up a lot of legislative floor time, and I think that leadership on both sides finds the CR or omnibus approach pretty convenient sometimes when they need to move legislation through. So I guess that's all I'd add.
Great. Just to make some final comments on this section on appropriations, my sense, one, is it's not untypical when a new administration comes in to delay completing that current year's funding and to let them have their imprint on it. My hope is, since most of the negotiations over the current fiscal year 2017, have been completed, that the administration can put its stamp on a few things, but that they'll be able to move things forward by the end of April and complete the appropriations process for 2017. I think it underscores the critical importance of people coming to town for the Energy Independence Summit. It's a great opportunity to talk to your members of Congress, for us to reinforce our support for the Clean Cities program and the diesel emission reduction grants program, and to make sure that our allies and supporters defend those programs and fight for them. And that's what we're going to be working on. And in terms of fiscal year 2018, the next year, I think that's really where the new administration will, come out and show their priorities in terms of the federal budget. With that, I think we'll move on to the Renewable Fuel Standard. So, Kaleb, I'm just going to turn to you on the Renewable Fuel Standard and let you give a little update on where we're at and what the outlook looks like, and what the new administration might do or might not do, and then what may or may not happen in the Congress.
Excellent. Sure. Thanks. Well, as you know, there was, for most of you that are following, there was some Renewable Fuel Standard news on Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so here just a couple weeks ago. So obviously the RFS is very important driver for growth in the biodiesel industry and for other biofuels as well. If you look at just a decade ago, U.S. biodiesel market was about 100 million gallons and has now grown to a 2.5 billion gallon market here in 2016. And a lot of that growth can be attributed to biodiesel's role as an advanced biofuel under that program. So as far as the incoming administration goes, there was an interview here in mid-November where U.S. Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack was talking about trade and a number of other things, but he basically said that the RFS will survive a Donald Trump administration because biofuels are too well established in rural areas to be dismantled, and then there's just way too much money and everything into the infrastructure investments and everything to completely dismantle that program. But he did mention that there's likely to continue to be a lot of saber rattling on the issue. But and we pretty much agree with that. The RFS is current law, so it would take an act of Congress to repeal it or to make major changes to it. And again, there continues to be strong bipartisan support for biodiesel and for an energy policy that's providing clean air, economic growth to rural areas, and expanding U.S. Energy production. So each year the EPA has to set those percentage standards by November 30th of the calendar year for the following year. So this is the second year in a row that EPA has hit that deadline from a timing standpoint, and they announced those numbers. The conventional biofuels segment hit 15 billion gallons. Advanced biofuels were set at 4.28 billion gallons. Cellulosic at 311 million. Biomass-based diesel at 2 billion, for a total of 19.28 billion gallons of renewable fuels under the program. So they actually increased the volumes of advanced biofuels and that total volume for 2017 from what they proposed this spring. So it was good to see that increase. And then, particularly that increase in the advanced biofuel category largely comes from EPA acknowledging that more biodiesel and renewable diesel will be available and in the marketplace for use. So a good sign to see increases in all those categories and to see EPA on time with that rule for the second year in a row.
Great. And do you and obviously you're going to have to with the new administration coming in and another round for the following year due next November, going to work to educate the new crowd. What's your strategy for that?
Yep, that will absolutely be important. You could call it good or bad, but from the biodiesel perspective, that biomass-based diesel category, because it basically has a 1 billion gallon with an asterisk that says EPA has the ability to increase that volume if they see fit, means that on a yearly basis our industry is going into EPA and making the case for increasing that number. So the bad part is that's a lot of work and a lot of effort. The good part is that we're continuously in there educating those folks, all levels of EPA and the administration and other areas on what the program is, how it works, why increased biomass-based diesel volumes are good, important, and attainable from the industry standpoint. So we'll continue to do that, and it'll still be part of our process. And that continuous education, like you mentioned earlier, is really important.
Great, thanks, Caleb. We're going to now talk briefly about a couple of other new opportunities that could be out there. Let's start first with infrastructure legislation. Donald Trump during the campaign talked a lot about infrastructure. They've talked about it some during the transition period. And my question is, do you think there's an opportunity to have alternative fuel infrastructure included in any kind of initiative from the new administration and the Congress? And we'll start with Genevieve. Why don't you go first?
Thanks, Ken. We absolutely do think that there's an opportunity and a case to be made for including alternative fuel infrastructure in any infrastructure package, because I think, again, the starting point is nobody knows what everybody means by that word infrastructure. So everyone is making the case in energy, transportation, power, how that fits into a vision of a U.S. infrastructure. And we're certainly making the case that investments in a 21st century infrastructure system need to be forward-looking, not backward-looking. So that means that you invest in the vehicles and fueling infrastructure that serves the next generation of vehicles. And I think it makes perfect sense within the ambit of the goals of such legislation that are about making our commercial sectors stronger, more productive, more economical, safer. There's obviously a investment in electric drive transportation in the commercial and private transportation spheres is a critical part of that. That being said, again, we look at the administration has signaled that it's a priority. Some folks on the Hill have also weighed in positively about an infrastructure package, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about how such a thing would be paid for, whether it's treated as deficit spending, which seems unlikely based on the posture of a lot of folks in Congress. It would feel an awfully lot like Recovery Act spending if they didn't offset it somehow. But if they offset it, they're going to have to look at they're looking at changes in the tax code. And once you open the door to it seems unlike that. Do they have to do all of tax reform, or just going to cut off a little piece of it about repatriating foreign dollars to pay for this infrastructure investment? So not to get too weedy on the topic, but substantively, absolutely, an infrastructure effort includes electric drive and I would say other alternative fuels as well. Procedurally, I think that this is murkier the path forward is you know, a little more challenging than the rhetoric would suggest.
Right, I would agree with that. Phillip Wiedmeyer, there's been a lot of discussion about, or within the most recent transportation law, there were there's a process to designate alternative fuel vehicle and infrastructure corridors, and the Department of Transportation is in the process of designating those corridors. Do you think that provides any kind of an opportunity, if there were to be a new federal infrastructure initiative, to kind of make the case for alternative fuels being included in a new infrastructure spending initiative?
I think it's certainly a possibility. It all depends on the like everything else, on the funding mechanism. And let me go back on the infrastructure a moment. And one thing that in addition to the repatriation that's being talked about, that another pay for that's being discussed is the our public-private partnerships. And I think that the alternative fuel industry has many years of and many great models of where public-private partnerships have resulted in increased infrastructure for alternative fuels. And so it could be an opportunity and a model that could be applied in that infrastructure legislation, or through the corridor designations, if that would be a mechanism for funding what's being identified through that process. Of course, the DOT is going through, there'll be several more rounds of that corridor designation, and so I would say it would be important to get those corridors designated and lay the groundwork, so when the opportunity from a funding standpoint comes along, that groundwork is already laid.
Great, thanks, Phillip. Here's a point of news that I don't know how many people have seen this, but some of our audience have texted this in, that Scott Pruitt, who's the current Oklahoma Attorney General, has been nominated to be the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Anybody have any comments on that, since it's hot news?
I think I'm using, I'll read that silence as agreement from the other folks on the call. That will be an interesting one to dive into and learn a little more about.
Okay, good. So it remains to be seen. He's certainly been somewhat of a critic of the Obama EPA, but it remains to be seen. Here's another question from the audience, which is, will Trump's rhetoric about climate change evolve into a loosening of EPA emission requirement? Anybody have any comments on that?
It's Genevieve. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I would just say I think we can expect the incoming president's rhetoric on climate change to evolve. It's already evolved. I'm not sure where that ends up. I think it's important to, and there are, there's a spectrum of possibilities of simply, not enforcing or, not following up on our commitments under the Paris Accord to, dismantling the endangerment finding that enables EPA to regulate carbon. I think somewhere between those two those two far ends of that spectrum is probably where the administration will end up. But I think it's it's absolutely not clear. While there's been some, a lot of the folks who are coming into this administration are famously skeptical of climate change, how that, whether that is, how that's implemented as a priority in EPA's, in revised goals. I think we're going to have to just watch carefully.
Okay, and then as a follow-up on that, do you see at all vulnerability, and this could be Genevieve or anybody else, to the auto efficiency standards or the truck efficiency standards, which were a major priority for the last administration and have been a major driver in the move to alternative fuel vehicles?
Still Square.
This is Paul. Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm sure Pruitt will look at these new these CAFE standards that the EPA just announced that were supposed to be announced in 2018, and they jumped forward. I'm sure it's going to look at that, and that sort of addresses a little bit of your question.
And Phil Square, go ahead.
I think that to sort of tie these two questions together, I think the rhetoric will exceed the results. I think there's a relatively if the regulations were purely done through an agency's action and not directed or mandated by Congress, I think that that's going to be a defining difference in his ability to do things he wants to within the administrative agencies. The agencies do most of what they do because Congress tells them they can. And if they have the authority to do that, well, then they may have the authority to roll it back, but it's going to be a process. It's not just sort of a waving a regulatory magic wand and making it go away. The federal regulatory processes are, for better or worse, a battleship, and they take a relatively long time to change. So I would not expect dramatic, fast action, but this is something that's going to roll out over the course of years. There's going to be the periodic high-profile stroke of lightning that hits some program, but I don't think in general terms it's going to be a wholesale rollback.
Great, thanks. Next question, and this is for both Paul Kerkhoven first and then Phillip Wiedmeyer. One of the things we've been discussing and beginning to work on is an effort to actually get the Clean Cities program authorized by Congress. As I think most folks know, currently there is not a law that actually authorizes the Clean Cities program. There's a law that authorizes education and outreach for alternative fuels and vehicles, under which the Clean Cities program is run. And we've been talking about actually getting the program authorized so it would be less vulnerable to funding cuts in the future. So first Paul and then Phillip, thoughts on whether this is a good time to do that and how best to do it and how important that is.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, if you recall, Congressman Israel from New York a couple of Congresses ago proposed legislation to do exactly that. We were at the same time working with Senator Hatch to get legislation introduced to authorize the Clean Cities program. I think providing stability to the Clean Cities funding levels is important. Issues such as what happened this year, where dollars are siphoned away from the hard work and education from the coordinators for studies and analysis in the Department of Energy that is really going to provide some more stability to it. Also, the potential of directing how these funds will get done, get used, like whether through deployment or through Clean City grants themselves. It provides great opportunity. I think Ken and I, we walked the halls of Congress with several senators last year, potentially including such a provision on energy legislation, or having individual bills introduced. That consensus is still there, and re-education is there. I think it may actually be one of the issues that should be on the information packets for the coordinators and the Clean City stakeholders when we go through the Hall of Congress in February. I think it's a big move. I think it provides some stability and some credence to the program.
Great, thanks, Paul. Phillip, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, let me just say, Ken, that it's certainly a great opportunity to build on the successes that we've had in recent years and the support that we've built for the Clean Cities program and clean transportation on the Hill. And we certainly ought to take advantage of and try to take it to the next level and get the program authorized. We've had some great successes. We've garnered support for clean fuels and clean vehicles, and we may have to adjust the messaging a little bit. But I think if you look at the contribution that the clean transportation industry makes to the economy in terms of jobs and GDP, and at the same time achieving energy independence, that those are all policy themes that will be popular with both the new Republican administration and has been popular on a bipartisan basis on Capitol Hill. So I absolutely think this is a good opportunity, and we should start that effort.
Great, thanks. So and then question for Genevieve. There was an effort in both the House and the Senate. They both passed energy legislation, pretty close to getting something done. It looks like that's not going to make it at the end of this in this Congress. Your thoughts, Genevieve, on the outlook for that moving forward? It didn't have much related to alternative fuels and vehicles in it, but I think it had some things. Just any comments on that, and whether it's likely to be revived, and are there opportunities there to move our efforts forward?
I do think, first, I agree. The outlook for the current conference doesn't look bright. People are talking about perhaps some small piece of it, of what was in both of the bills, passing as a conference report at the end of this Congress, but I think even that's in doubt. But for us, there were a couple of important pieces in that bill, and it goes to your conversation about creating a statutory authorization for important programs so that they don't disappear when administrations change. And so the Vehicle Innovation Act, which was included in the Senate energy bill, would have authorized the vehicle and infrastructure RD&D programs, and we strongly supported that. And if it doesn't make it through in whatever happens at the end of this year, we'll certainly be looking for another legislative pathway for it. In the Senate Energy Committee has always worked in a pretty bipartisan way, and there was bipartisan support for that piece of the energy bill, and I fully expect them to be be pushing forward on energy legislation, and you know, for better or worse, I think a lot of the energy behind that will come from folks who want to have a go at the more controversial aspects of our energy policy about you know, permitting and regulation of energy extraction, production, and distribution. And I think they're going to want to have those conversations. And so along with those will be conversations about what's the potential for RD&D on clean vehicles and infrastructure.
Great. Thanks, Genevieve. So lastly, let's talk a little bit. It's been filtered throughout the conversation, but a little bit about strategy. One question I had for all of you, I know several years ago the natural gas industry, the propane industry, the biodiesel industry, and I think even electric, that you all did some analysis on job creation and economic opportunities created through your various industries. And I'm wondering, given the current climate, if you're looking at updating any of that analysis, given that you've all talked about the importance of talking about the economic benefits as being a key argument as we move forward. I don't know, Kaleb, you want to start with that?
Sure, and yeah, that's right on. We do quite a bit to pull together the data and facts and to have figures to bring in so that it's not just anecdotal arguments when we go to Congress. And fortunately and unfortunately, we've had to update that economic data about every other year to work towards extending the biodiesel tax incentives. So specific to that, yes, we have those jobs numbers, GDP, salary, and those kind of things. And we really, what seems to work pretty well for us is we try to lay it out as, here's what the industry is currently, here's what it could look like with that federal support in place, here's what it could look like if you let it expire. So that gives a pretty good contrast and a pretty good visual for those members of Congress when we're going out and educating and lobbying on behalf of our industry.
Great. Phil, how about you? Square.
Yeah, absolutely. You bet. We're definitely going to be doing some more analysis of where we are. It's been a few years since we've done it for our own purposes, but I'm really looking forward to sort of layering over where propane country is, which is typically out in the more rural areas and things like that, and overlaying that with where Trump won. And so I think there's going to be a pretty strong correlation between where the propane industry is and where his supporters were. So we'll be able to use that information the minute we get it. So I'm looking forward to that response.
Great. I mean, one of the things that I think would be incredibly effective is if we were able to combine kind of the economic output from the various alternative fuels, combining them all, and then looking at those, particularly if we're able to then look at those state by state to show where the jobs are being created. And so, and I think that would be particularly effective with members of Congress. Anybody, Paul, Genevieve, have thoughts on that? Paul?
Yeah, it's. I concur with with all of that. I think it'll be a great issue. We're doing the same thing that Phil is doing and is looking at, and where we are. We're doing it in conjunction with the American Gas Associations and distribution companies. Yeah, but definitely, that's. It'll be a great benefit for all of us, and where all that will end up going.
And Genevieve, thoughts on economics and how to make the case?
Well, it's clearly the right message. and making the micro and macroeconomic case for federal investment and support for alternative fuels is absolutely the way we should all be moving. And we, and I think the key, and we all learned this in the Recovery Act, is that you have to be absolutely transparent and credible in your economic calculation. How you're counting your investment, your supply chain. Make sure that your metrics are good. It just would be my one message.
Great. And lastly, I'm going to give Phillip Wiedmeyer the last word on just overall strategy, the importance of working with your members of Congress, and the importance of coming to Washington for the Energy Independence Summit. Phillip?
Yeah, as Genevieve said, it's both, there's a macro and there's a micro, and the micro part is, all politics is local, and so the most important and most impactful thing that can be done is to educate individual members of Congress and their staff on the benefits of clean transportation from all the things you've heard about on the call today from the various panelists. And the Energy Independence Summit in February offers an outstanding opportunity. I mean, the timing could not be better in terms of being able to, before the FY17 appropriations are finalized, prior to the beginning of the consideration of the FY18 appropriations, the start of an effort towards comprehensive tax reform. All of those issues provide a great opportunity for the message to be heard, and the Energy Independence Summit and our Capitol Hill Day provides that. I think this past year at the summit, we visited over 225 offices in one day. We need to at least duplicate that and increase it. And a great way to do it is bring stakeholders with you. That is the best way and the most impactful on members of Congress in terms of telling your story, for them to hear it from their constituents, how these policies are beneficial to things that are going on in their districts. So I would encourage you to look at attending and bringing your message to the Hill that everyone in the industry can benefit from.
Great. Thanks, Phillip. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. This was great. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your insight and expertise. Thanks for your hard work. And going forward, thanks for your continuing efforts. And we look forward to working with you all at leading up to the summit and beyond. I'd also like, I understand that there was a bit of a technical glitch and some people were unable to log into the webinar. And for those of you who were able to log in by audio, I apologize for that. The webinar has been recorded, and we will get it up on our website hopefully by tomorrow. So you'll be able to look at it there, and we'll send out a link to everybody. So thanks again for everybody's participation, and please register as soon as you can for the upcoming summit, and we look forward to seeing you in Washington.
Thanks, Ted.
Good night, good afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ken. Bye.